All right, welcome again to Purposeful Patriarchs. I am your host, Eman. Last episode, we did chapter 3 of the Moynihan report, which was looking at the roots of the problem and looking at what happened with the dominant society and how that affected black people and the Negro class. So today, what we're going to do now is discuss the role of the Negro woman. So this is a critical point in the story, and this was referenced in the actual Moynihan report. So what we'll do now is we will just discuss this and break this down because this is such a crucial part of the Moynihan report, and it also talks about the tangle of pathology, and it will look at some of how the role of the Negro woman, how that actually manifests itself into the black family structure. Okay, so I'll continue to read and then I'll add my own commentary in there. So one of the most important and often misunderstood parts of the crisis described in the Moynihan report is the central role forced on the Negro woman across generations. This wasn't cultural, it wasn't natural, it was engineered by history. So number one, and I think there's about 5 points. I'll try and do this all in one take because I'm quite a busy dude. So I want to try and do this all in one take. So number one, so slavery made the black woman the stable center because the system targeted the man. Okay, so under American slavery, the black family was systematically dismantled. Marriages were not legally recognized. Husbands, wives, and children could be sold apart at any moment. Men had no authority, no protection, and no ability to provide. So the only stable anchor left was the mother. Okay, so I want to mention a few things. Okay. So the fact that the black woman became the stable center because the system targeted the man, this is now obviously ensconced in history now. So we all have seen this happen. Okay, so this is why in America you have concepts like Big Mama's house. The black woman is the backbone of the community. You have all of these phrases, that are steeped in the legacy of the slavery and the racism which affected the Negro Americans. Okay, and what we always and that's always the focus rather than the systematic targeting of the black man. Okay, so what you always have to remember is that the biggest thing that they did was destroy the black man. Without this destruction of the black man, then they would have been in a position to actually have been together, to build a family, to get married and to build a family. Okay, so this is why I will always keep coming back to the fact that within the black American culture, the black American structure, they don't practice marriage. Okay, and it is steeped in this history because all this stuff starts to make sense when you go back to the history, and this is why I am really as I'm really trying to promote the getting back to marriage, because once you know the history, we should change our behavior, change the ways of doing things so that we can get back to building a strong marriage and a strong family structure, because that everything most of the things that black people need to have that dignity, to have that self-respect, to have that generational wealth comes down to the family structure. And this is why both black men and both black women in some ways have to come back together. But I will talk about why there are fundamental reasons why this thing can't happen and why it needs to happen, and why the changing of behavior is happening in black men, but it needs to happen more in the lives of black women. Okay, so marriages again under slavery and racism were not legally recognized. Okay, so a man and woman can have children and they would not be legally recognized as a marriage, as a family. Okay, and this is obviously perpetuated over generations and generation. So the further destruction happens when husband, wives and children can be sold at any moment. Okay, so you could be a husband, you're trying to raise your family under extreme stressful conditions of slavery and the hostility of racism, and at any moment your wife could be sold, your child or your 2 children, your 3 children, your 5 children could be sold, and they could be anywhere in America, or you yourself could be sold. And this is why generationally they were not able to, there were slave rebellions, but they were not able to pass on information down their genetic line, and this is what this is what again is another component of why the black community in America couldn't get out as fast or couldn't make themselves more viable, because the information wasn't passed down as a family unit. Okay, so this had so many ramifications for the dominant society, and this is why they were able to hold them in bondage for so long. Okay, so the final point final midpoint in number 1. So men had no authority, no protection, and no ability to provide. Okay, and this is one of the fundamental things for, especially for men in general, but black men in particular. You do not feel like a man when you have no authority. You can't protect. Okay, because you are the biggest threat to the dominant society. Okay, and obviously you are a minority, so there's no help that you can really call upon from your mates, from other families, from other networks of people. Okay, and you also had no ability to provide. So even if you wanted to get your wife or get your children out of harm's way, you had no ability to make that happen. Okay, and because, and you can look into this in terms of the buck breaking and the systematic destruction of the black male image that has happened over centuries, to the point where, a lot of these things happen where, a black man will be flogged, he will be absolutely brutalized, destroyed, he will be set free, and then he would be asked to protect his spouse, his wife, and because he was psychologically and physically destroyed, he had no fight left in him. And one of the saddest aspects of all of this is, obviously, we know the dominant society has done this to black men, but when you hear how black women talk about black men, you're just like, that they didn't create this system. And I feel that there's a lack of care and a lack of sympathy to what black men had gone through during this period, and I will discuss that in greater detail in future videos. Okay, so the only stable anchor was the mother. Psychologists and historians note that slavery produced a matrifocal, so this is a mother-centered family pattern, because the father's role was deliberately erased. The black woman had become provider, protector, and the emotional core and the consistent parent. This wasn't empowerment, it was a survival system designed to destroy the traditional family structure. Okay, so again, what you see in the black community is a role reversal. Okay, so this is why, and I've got the book from Dr. Tierson Johnson. Okay, so I've really researched this and studied this, because you can look at psychologists, and I will share a video of Dr. Alan Poussaint and Dr. Francis Cress-Wilson. Okay, and they were talking about this in 1973. I think it's in 1973. Yeah, I think it's about early 1970s, and it talks about the role reversal and the control of the dynamic between black men and black women. Okay, and then there's videos from the 1968, shortly after the Moynihan report came, and these videos are really seminal in terms of understanding exactly what went on with black people in under slavery and Jim Crow. Okay, so you see this role reversal. The woman has now become the provider, the protector, the emotional core, and the consistent parent. How did she become the consistent parent? Because at any point, at any time, the man could lose his life. Okay, and this is often forgotten. This black women didn't do this. The dominant society did this to the black man. Okay, and this is why, in terms of maybe the dignity that black men have, it's very difficult for them to have any dignity because they have been so brutalized by the system. Okay, and there are many things to really break down and open up as we continue to go through this. Okay, so just to go back to these doctors, Dr. Alan Poussin and Dr. Francis Wilson, you really need good PhDs who are willing to be honest about the situation, and that's one of the reasons why I love Dr. T.S.R. Johnson, Dr. Alan Poussin, Dr. Francis Wilson. You go back and read their writings, you read their books, and you realize what has been done to black people is absolutely tragic. It's absolutely horrific. But we can change this, and I'll talk about that shortly. Okay, so number 2. So after emancipation, the burden didn't lift, it deepened. Okay, so it gets worse. Okay, so after emancipation, so even after freedom, black men were denied the tools needed to reclaim the traditional father role. Okay, so jobs were scarce. So this is where any jobs that black men were able to get, there were not very many of them. So you can imagine there might be one job and there might be 100 men that are looking for that particular job. And one of the things that really affected black men was the fact that they were the last to be hired and the first to be fired. Okay, and then what also happened is that they suffered racial violence and humiliation targeted black men specifically. Okay, so you don't just have the backdrop of slavery and racism, that there was also racial violence, hostility and humiliation. You might be going to a shop, you might be going to get groceries, and people will be shouting obscenities to you. This happened also in Britain as well, to both black British Caribbeans, to Asians as well. And this is one of the reasons why I'm talking about this stuff, is to try and provide some clarity, some similarities and differences between white supremacy and also institutional racism, and why the dominant society is doing this to people, to different ethnicities. Okay. So now Jim Crow punished any sign of independence and assertiveness. So this is where you get the phrases of, you can't be like an uppity Negro, or Negroes are uppity Negroes, and all these sorts of different things. And the dominant society, these Europeans, these Americans, are, because slavery dominated a lot of the world at that time, there were different types of slave rebellions. Okay, and they were all sort of looking over the fence in Haiti, in Brazil, and all these sorts of different places to kind of keep a tight grip on their slaves. Okay, so if something worked in Brazil, the Americans would try and do it over here. If a slave rebellion happened in Haiti, why did it happen, and how can we stop it over in America? How can we stop it over in England? And all these sorts of different things. So this is why you have to try and understand that a lot of the reasons for a lot of these things are very simple. Okay, they're very pervasive. Okay, and this is why there are similarities and differences in terms of the way slavery as a global system, whether it be the French colonial system, the British colonial system, all of these things are very, very similar, but they also, because of geography, timings, all these sorts of different things, they show up slightly differently, but also very similarly. Okay, so then in the Moynihan report, they refer to an anthropologist called Margaret Mead, and she argued that in every human society, men become full adults by becoming providers. But when the male role is broken, the mother-child unit becomes the default family core. Okay, and so I'll repeat that: when the male role is broken, the mother-child unit becomes the default family core. Okay, so remember, this again is a situation that has come about from deep distress in the black community. Okay, so the mother child becomes the default family core, and one of the things that I've noticed now is that a lot of institutions will say that they're doing stuff for black people, but black people is about the mother and the child. It's not about doing stuff specifically for black men. And this is the trick back. And this is one of the things that I really, really want to hone in on, is that if you're going to do something for black people, you have to start with empowering and giving the money, education and resources to black men so that they can be adults and be providers. Okay, all this stuff of empowering black women and stuff like that, this is the stuff that's still being perpetuated to today, even though we're not under slavery. And we're going to chart back from the 1960s why, even though after slavery, why hasn't the black community been able to, even though they're not slaves in a sense anymore, why haven't they been able to be economically accepted and also economically enfranchised and socially accepted? Okay, and I've got more PowerPoints to actually break this stuff down, so please tune in as I say, because this stuff is so deep, it's so entangled. Because even though I grew up in the UK, in London, in the UK, seeing all this stuff, because we got a lot of American media, we tried to do and listen to a lot of what was happening in Black America, because again, as I said, similarities and differences. We're both in a system that is dominated by people who don't look like us, and we're trying to understand how we navigate a system that isn't designed for us, because we also want to be people that are valued members of society, and we want to be contributing to society. Okay, but then sometimes, but a lot of the time, there's a massive system of marginalization which affects black people, and we have to detail this very, very precisely. And one of the reasons why I love talking about marriage and the family structure is that if you can bring back that together, you can be in such a position where you can lobby and demand a change from the dominant society. But if we're fractured, if we're atomized, if we're individuals, that will never happen. Okay, and your children will suffer, because black people, we still have children. Okay, we're still trying to raise the next generation, and if we're not doing the right things, if we're not doing the things that other ethnicities are doing or other immigrants are doing, then how can we say that we want to be recognized, that we want to be respected, that we deserve the things that we need to be able to get ourselves out of our sorry state? Okay, so that's so the next point is that mother-child unit becomes the default family core. That's exactly what happened in the post-slavery South. Okay, and then E. Franklin Fraser writes that by the time slavery ended, Negro women were already accustomed to being dominant figures in family life, not by choice, but because the society allowed men no room to lead. Okay, and this is why it's such this pattern. Again, you have to realize from the 1660s, okay, when they started to produce laws that racialized slavery, okay, this is what created the matrifocal pattern. Okay, so I'll go back to that. So this matrifocal mother-centered family structure, and from listening to people like Dr. T.S. Johnson, Dr. Ronald Neal, I think BGS Ibmore and Accountable Commentary, they actually have termed this now to be something called a gynocracy. Okay, and I have a black culture PowerPoint which will begin to break down and give you solid definitions on these things, because they're not under slavery anymore. So why do black women dominate the social discussion around the family structure when you know that there is a pattern of 300 years of black women leading the community because they were under slavery? Why haven't they been able to get out of that and say, you know what, even though the dominant society doesn't want you to lead, we want you to lead our families? And you look at the statistics around the single motherhood rates and all these sorts of different things, and you will start to begin to see that they are choosing they are choosing now to do the wrong thing. Okay, and there are specific reasons for that. But again, because people are very much steeped in narratives and myths, they don't want to be honest about exactly what's been happening in the black community. Okay, so number 3, so urban migration pushed black women even further into the provider role. So in the last episode, we talked about the fact that they migrated from the south to the north. Okay, so when black families moved during the Great Migration, they entered a dangerous urban environment. Higher unemployment for men, low wages, okay, collapsing community institutions, overcrowded slums. Okay, black men were the first fired, last hired, which meant black women often became the primary breadwinners, again, not by tradition, but by necessity. By the 1960s, 56% of Negro women aged 25 to 64 were in the labor force, compared to 42% of white women. Many families depended entirely on the mother's income. This shift, forced by economic reality, further weakened the father's position and deepened the mother's responsibility. Okay, so really and truthfully, what you want is you want the majority of your Negro men to be working. Okay, and this is where the system of marginalization comes to the fore. Okay, so even though you have this racial slavery that's going on in America, you have Jim Crow and this segregation, there's also a system of marginalization which stops black men from getting hired. Okay, and you see that again, because they knew that if they kept the black men out of the provider role, he has less dignity, he can't be a father. Okay, because you do not have the leverage to call the shots. If this woman has gone to work and has earned the money, how can you now be calling the shots in terms of how she spends the money or what she thinks she should do with the money for the family? Okay, and this is, again, it was forced. But what has happened since the 1960s is that there was, because of that pattern is so entrenched it's centuries. It's not years, it's not decades, it's centuries. Okay, so this is 12 to 15, maybe nearly 20 generations of people that have been been practicing this particular pattern. Okay, so you can understand psychologically, okay, that it has destroyed the black community, and this is why I as I said again, like, I have so much sympathy to the black Americans, because I'm just like how has this happened to you? And you can break this down in terms of an economic situation, in terms of what the dominant society did to them, but you can also look at the spiritual reason and the selfishness and the power and the control that the white people had over black people, okay, in America. So number 4, okay, the Negro women became strong, but at a massive cost to the family structure. Okay, so again, please go and read the Moynihan report for yourself if you don't believe these points. This is just a summary. It goes into greater detail. It will talk about stuff like education, welfare, out of wedlock births, all these sorts of different things that have affected the black community. But I'm just providing a small summary. Okay, so you go on you just type it in on Google. You can read the Wikipedia. You can read it on the actual government website. So this is the government actually saying this. Okay, they've produced a report on this. This is not my opinion. Okay, but my opinion is some of the stuff that I've seen from this report, and also the media, and also the statistics. Okay, so the Moynihan report makes a controversial but crucial point. The strength of the Negro woman emerged directly from the crushing weakness forced upon the Negro man. Okay, her resilience held families together, but the imbalance where the mother is the provider and authority figure and the father is marginalized, created long-term structural strains. Okay, and this is where I will start to compare what is sort of the gynocracy, okay, which is something that has really happened from the 1900s or 1960 onwards, where you have different groups of people that essentially have their foot on the black man's neck. Okay, and that starts off with, you know, with the white man, with the white woman, and then with the black woman. Okay, and I shout out to Sergeant Willie Pete, who talks about marginalization as a concept. Okay, so this is where you look into how they didn't educate the Negro man, how they stopped him from employment, how they any cities that were built by black men, any communities that were created by black men, they were actually targeted through riots and massacres. I've broken all this stuff down because all of this stuff is in the literature. People have wrote books about this. Sergeant Willie Pete has put out a book called The Black Matriarch, and I've started to pull excerpts from these books. So I'm not just talking about this from a my opinion. Okay, this stuff is in the laws. Okay, this is why whenever people say that you know, there's no racism in America, you know, that the same laws that are there to help white people, they're also there to help black people. This is true, but what people have to remember is that there's the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and you have to see exactly how a law is designed, but also how it's also enforced. Okay, when a black man who's married to his wife, whether she's a black woman or she's a white woman, they go for a loan, okay, to try and buy a house, and someone says, yeah, you qualify for a loan, but yeah, we're not going to give it to you anyway. Okay, this is how you can see that there's the letter of the law, but there's the spirit of the law in terms of how people approach it, how people enact it, how the dominant society will band together and do stuff like redlining. Okay, and again, these are the things that we will start to break down in greater detail. Okay, so yeah, so we see again that even though the Negro woman or the black woman had resilience, her resilience held families together. So in some respects, you do have to give credit to the black women for holding the families together, okay, especially under the racial slavery. Okay, but the imbalance, okay, where the mother is the provider and the authority figure and the father is marginalized, created long-term structural strains. The matriarchal household wasn't a cultural design, it was a historical adaptation to systems that destroyed male authority. Okay, and this is why you'll see a lot of black women do not respect male authority. Okay, because their mums were chatting all manner of nonsense to the black father. Okay, and this has become a pattern, and again, this stuff is so deep, it's so tangled, and it's so incredibly sad. Okay, they denied men economic stability. Okay, they punished male leadership and prevented men from fulfilling traditional roles. Meanwhile, black women had to carry both the economic load and the emotional and parental load. I've not even got into the fact that, you know, yeah, they didn't want to educate, and this is the split that the dominant society has created within the relationship of the black man and the black woman. Okay, so one of the things that they did on the plantations was that they forced the black man to either be the buck and also to be the breeder. Okay, so because he was the strength of the plantation, okay, he was always, you know, told what to do. Okay, but they never educated him because they knew it would be dangerous. So they never allowed a black man to be educated. Okay, but what they did do is they educated the black woman. Okay, so they gave her stuff like the blueprints. She was able to have money. She was able to learn how to read, how to do bookkeeping, how to understand directions and all that sort of things. Because and you read this stuff in things like the Willie Pete letter. Okay, which and obviously as the children are seeing this also causes psychological damage to them as well. Okay, so it's not just psychological damage to the black man, it's psychological damage to the black woman and psychological damage to the black children. Okay, and this is how the cycle has been perpetuated. I think it will talk about that in the next one. Yeah, so the cycle reinforced. Okay, so this is number 5. So the cycle reinforced. Because mothers were working long hours and fathers were often absent or unemployed, children lacked consistent supervision. Okay, and they missed out on parental presence. The dual parent support system, typically of middle class families. This contributed to the cycle the report warns about. So early pregnancy leads to low education, leads to low income, leads to unstable family structure and repetition across generations. In summary, the Negro woman became the backbone because history broke the backbone of the Negro man. The Negro woman held the family together through slavery, Jim Crow, urban poverty, and unemployment. But she had to do so because the systems around her systematically undermined the role of the black man, leaving her to shoulder both parent roles. And this is where you get all of this stuff on Mother's Day, or so Father's Day, where they'll say, "Oh, I am the father and the mother." These are things that have been perpetuated for generations, that even in 2019, 2018, you can go on Twitter, you can go on in 2023 and 2024, where black women are still saying that they are the father and the mother. But this is a different time from the time of slavery and Jim Crow. Since the 1960s, there has been an even deeper split because the ideology has been further diminished because of a particular ideology. So we're going to look at not just this matrifocal system that has happened during slavery and racism, but what's happened since the 1960s to actually create an even worse black community in America. And it's also affecting black families and black relationships over in the UK as well. Okay, so her resilience is undeniable, but the burden was never meant to be borne by one person. Okay, this is the heart of the Moynihan argument. You cannot fix the crisis in black America without understanding how historical forces forced women into roles they never chose, and how the weakening of the black man's position destabilized the entire family structure. Okay, so yeah, so this is a very sad excerpt from the Moynihan report to see what has happened to the role of the Negro woman during slavery and Jim Crow, because it's such a crushing burden. And this is not to say it wasn't bad for black women. It was terrible for black women, but no matter how bad it was for black women, it was incredibly worse for the black man. Okay, because he suffered from the lynching, the murder, the disgrace, the castrations, the public humiliation, the public disgrace, and the fact that he can never be in a position to be the father. And that's the one thing from a biblical perspective, no man should ever be in a position where he's never allowed to be the head of his family, to be the head of his home. Okay, and God in Christ Jesus does not want that for any man across the world, regardless of slavery, regardless of Jim Crow. That is not the position that Christ wants for men. No matter your ethnicity, men should always be the leaders of their marriages and of their homes. Okay, and this is what you read in the Bible, in Matthew 19, where Jesus says, what God has brought together, let no man put asunder. Okay, and then in Ephesians 5, one of the reasons why I think this is particularly heart-wrenching is that, you know, that from a Christian perspective, because I'm a believer in Christ, is that if the man is not in a position to look after his family, he doesn't feel like a man. And for all of us who are in Christ, we are holding on to Christ for our salvation. And one of the things that Christ does is that Christ and the man are sort of aligned together. So in Ephesians 5, it talks about the fact that Christ leads the church, and he sacrifices and gives his life for his bride, which is the church, which is all the people who are believing and trusting in him for salvation. And then the bride, or the woman, is the church, and she submits herself under his authority and leadership. And one of the reasons why the Moynihan report is so powerful to me is that you can look at the black community and you can see a way that God can fix this story, but it requires a change from the dominant society, but also us as black people. Because if we can fix ourselves by, you know, trusting and look into what because this system of slavery, I'll be perfectly honest with you, is so demonic, it's so outrageous, okay, and it's a spiritual thing as well. Okay, but there is a remedy where we can resolve this by simply seeing what God has in store, that God can redeem us. And I spoke about this before in terms of the fact that from the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis, it talks about the Imago Dei, that we are made in the image of Jesus Christ. And the dominant society has believed the lies of the devil, and they've enacted such rage, such hostility under a people who have been chosen and loved by God. And this is why they need to repent of their sins. They need to change their behavior when it comes to racism, because they are also not teaching accurate history about what has gone on in this racial slavery system and how that has destroyed the black family. Okay, so this is why we need to get back to marriage. We need to get back to family building. As much as, yes, this is not the way that we've always known it, it is the way that things can change, and it has to change immediately. Because as we'll see, the single motherhood rate, the fact that a lot of black men are still unemployed, or even to a certain extent now, a lot of black men are now a lot of black men are changing. Okay, and I'll talk about all the things like prison and the 13th Amendment and all these sorts of different things, because you need to understand as much of the picture as possible, because so many times people always just say, oh, it's just the men, this is what they've done, they don't want to be fathers, they don't want to be part of the home. That again is steeped in slavery. But also, now that black men have known the truth, how the system has targeted them, they specifically choose when they want to be fathers. Okay, and a lot of the research is coming out that black men are amazing and brilliant fathers, and this is sort of the stuff I want to uplift black men with, to know that they aren't the pariahs that a lot of society makes them to be, and all the propaganda around who we are, what we do, all these things that where a lot of black males, okay, these are a lot gangsters in the hoods and stuff like that, are tarnishing the image of black men. But black men are still aiming to do the work to change their ethnic image, and I think also black women need to do that work as well, because baby mama culture is destroying the black community. Okay, so for now I'll finish off from there. So again, this is Purposeful Patriarchs. I'm your host Eman, and again, we've just discussed the role of the Negro woman, a critical turning point in the story. So thank you very much for joining me, and if there's any way that you can share this with your friends and family, to actually give them information that they might not be aware about, and if you want to critique it, challenge me on it, drop a comment, drop a like, share it to people, because we're going to do so much work this year to actually try and start building this, because try and start building because also this role reversal is now happening in the white community as well. Again, there will be several videos to break this stuff down, but yeah, we'll leave it for now. So thank you very much for joining me. God bless you.